The Los Angeles Kings and Edmonton Oilers are about to rekindle a long dormant playoff rivalry, and I am all in favor of it. Meanwhile, there are now accusations of tampering against USC for their use of the transfer portal. Somebody give me some pearls to clutch. I'm shocked. Gaming the system in college football? Good morning. I'm James. This is your daily dose of sports and snark for the greatest sports city in the world, Los Angeles. This is Faithful Angelenos. It is May 2nd, and I am trapped now in Council Bluffs, Iowa. You may have heard me complain about being trapped in neighboring Omaha, Nebraska for the last couple of weeks. I called that place the manure pit. This place is basically the water treatment facility next to the manure pit, which is crazy. All this time I thought it was going to be COVID that took my sense of smell, not work. It's a gnarly place. Hey, by the way, before we get to the scores and the news, I want to thank the new subscribers who joined the channel yesterday. I really appreciate you getting in on the ground floor. If you like the content we've been putting out for the last couple of months, feel free to clickety-clack the like button. Clickety-clack the subscribe button. There's a notifications bell. Hit that. We put out a new video between 9 and 10 a.m. every single day. Sharing is caring. Let people know we exist. And yes, comment. For I am not God. I do not know everything. Let's look at the scores from yesterday. The Dodgers defeated Detroit 6-3. They are 14-7. They are tied for first place in the National League West. Meanwhile, in MLS, a couple of late goals after the 80th minute. That lifts LAFC to a 2-0 victory over Minnesota United. Meanwhile, the Stanley Cup playoffs kick off tonight. The LA Kings are making their first appearance since 2018. They will be in Edmonton. That game starts at 7 p.m. And we'll talk about it in a minute. So let's talk about the accusations of tampering against USC. Pitt coach Pat Narduzzi called SC's coach Lincoln Riley repeatedly over the weekend to complain about how Panthers wide receiver Jordan Addison may enter the transfer portal and make a beeline straight for USC. As straight as a beeline could get, of course. Now, I can understand why this coach wants to keep this wide receiver, right? If you think about it, the guy won the Biletnikoff Award. He was last year's best receiver in college football. He caught 100 passes. And yet, here's the thing. Nobody's accusing Riley of making any phone calls. Matter of fact, I mean, if you go online, you'll find some idiots spreading some rumors about how there's a big fat paycheck waiting for Addison if he goes to the West Coast. But there's no proof. And I don't even know necessarily if money is the deciding factor. Think about this for a moment. There were phone calls that Addison took from USC, not from the coaches, not from the boosters, but from quarterback Caleb Williams. Yeah, they're friends. They've known each other for a while. So Caleb Williams transfers from Oklahoma to SC. He's a Heisman candidate. You figure you've got a Heisman candidate in the backfield in Travis Dye, and then now you have a potential Heisman candidate at wide receiver if Addison enters the transfer portal and leaves for SC. That offense might wind up being literally invincible. The triplets like that in college football, that's unheard of. So no, I don't believe necessarily at this time that there was like tampering and malfeasance going on. I think a quarterback called a wide receiver and said, dude, we could really light it up out here. Do you want to hang? Until there's proof. You got nothing, Pitt. The only thing you got is Keaton Slovis at quarterback. You want to talk about Addison? Addison's probably sitting there going, man, I boosted some quarterback last year to the NFL. Now you're telling me I got to do the same for Keaton Slovis, the guy who left USC because he kept making poor decisions and kept throwing dying quails across the field? He's looking out for himself now. I don't blame them. Meanwhile, in regular style recruiting, USC has added a safety, Christian Pierce from Rancho Cucamonga. He'll be in the class of 2023. He's 6'2", 180 pounds. Now, we only got 3 stars from those type of folks who judge recruiting. But USC was apparently very excited to get him. He's a very physical tackler. So, maybe some attitude in the backfield for SC about a little more than a year from now. Meanwhile, with UCLA football, linebacker Christian Burkhalter entered the transfer portal. He is the 21st Bruin to do so since the end of last year. And I have a question for you if you're a UCLA supporter. No snark intended, by the way, it's legit. About 35% of the 2021 roster was born out of California. They were raised out of California, and then they come to UCLA. Wouldn't it be easier if Chip Kelly tried to rebuild recruiting in LA and the surrounding areas where there's a boatload of talent? Because if you think about it, those type of players are a lot less likely to get homesick. Wouldn't you agree? Tell me what you think. The Kings and Oilers are going to reunite in the playoffs for the first time in 3 decades. And the NHL, in my opinion, needs this for a lot of reasons. The Kings and Oilers, they faced off 7 times in the 1980s and the early 90s, and they produced some of the most memorable games, the most memorable series, including the Miracle on Manchester. Now, for those of you who are too young to know, 40 years ago, back when I had a future, 40 years ago, the Kings rallied from a 5-0 deficit in the third period to win in overtime 6-5. It's considered the greatest comeback in NHL history. But what also makes this rivalry, which again, they haven't faced each other since 1992, so they haven't seen each other in the playoffs in 30 years. But what also makes this rivalry compelling is that it's a little bit incestuous. Now, before you obtain a warrant to go through my Google search history, understand I'm not talking about that kind of incest. I'm talking about players who played for both teams during that era, not the least of which was Wayne Gretzky, the trade of the century. Remember that? Other players who played for both teams back and forth, there was Jari Kurri, there was Grant Fuhr, Marty McSorley, there was even Bernie Nichols, a longtime King who once scored 70 goals for Los Angeles. He wound up going to Edmonton, and those Oilers eliminated the Kings in one of those series. So yeah, I'm very much interested in how this one plays out. Even though the current teams, honestly, they don't have as much in common as the ones back in the 80s and the 90s. The Oilers are very potent on offense. The Kings, they're the 9th best defensive team in the NHL. So I'm going to start off by saying I love hockey, but I'm not as technical on hockey as some other analysts are. But this is what I know. We've read a lot about the so-called next generation of the Kings, right? And when you see the youngsters coming up, you hear the cliches like passing of the torch. They get thrown around a lot. But in my opinion, this series amounts to a time where the Kings would actually be better off if they don't pass a torch, okay? This series, in my opinion, is not about the youngsters. It's about 36-year-old Jonathan Quick. It's more about Anze Kopitar than Quentin Byfield. And oh, by the way, it is definitely more about Dustin Brown's last hurrah. Dustin Brown, the all-time leader in games played with the Kings, he retires at the end of the year. So this is about them. It's not about the youngsters. See, because another cliche that gets thrown around with younger athletes is, hey, the kids are all right. And that's true. The kids, they're just all right. They're not world beaters, not yet. The defense is actually rather ordinary with Drew Doughty injured. He's not going to play. He's out for the year. And remember, Jonathan Quick wasn't even the #1 goalie at the start of the year. That was Cal Peterson. He wasn't as good as Jonathan Quick. So the youth movement, not so much. So when you look over the matchups, I would imagine Edmonton should be considered the heavy favorite. But, and this is important, every intangible seems to point in the direction of the Kings. So we're going to break it down for you here. If you start with the offensive lines, and I don't mean offensive line like football, I'm talking about the three skaters up front. The Kings have two decent lines, centered by Ange Kopitar and Philip Deneau, who scored 27 goals this year. And of course, winger Adrian Kempe has scored 35 times. But Kopitar and Deneau will also be tasked with helping out on defense because Edmonton's Connor McDavid is considered the best player in the game. The guy led the league with 123 points. And who's the second line centered by? Leon Draisaitl, who was fourth in the league in points with 110. These guys put up a lot of goals really quickly. So LA can't match that. And then, oh, by the way, I only listed 2 LA centers. The Oilers have a terrific third center in Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. So you're asking 2 pretty good Kings lines to compete with 3 damn good Oilers lines. And oh, by the way, if Edmonton goes on the power play off a lot, they could just destroy LA like that. But the intangible for that matchup is this. If Connor McDavid is so great, how come he's only been to the playoffs 3 times in his career and advanced out of the first round only once? Is he somebody who wilts under the pressure of the big lights? The Kings also have a problem on defense. 4 defensemen for the Kings will be making their playoff debut. They like Mikey Anderson, and they should like Mikey Anderson, but this is uncharted waters for the guy. The Oilers, they aren't that deep on the blue line either. Their top defenseman, Darnell Nurse, is injured. They think he'll be back, but they just don't know when. So I would give a little edge to Edmonton all over again. And finally, you look in goal and you acknowledge that Mike Smith is red hot for Edmonton. He's gone 9-0-0 in his last 9 games, but he's 40. That's an intangible. Well, actually, it's kind of tangible. But the intangible is he's only faced Jonathan Quick once in the playoffs. That was 2012, and the Kings wiped the floor with Smith and his team then. So ultimately, it comes down to this to me. If Connor McDavid, Draisaitl, and Nugent-Hopkins, if those 3 had already won a cup, even if they didn't win a cup, even if they went to the finals, I would say they have the experience, they know how to win, they would smash the Kings, and it's a wrap. But they haven't. And then you talk about the intangibles that all favor LA. For example, to win a cup, it's common knowledge that you need a clutch goalie on a hot streak. That's Jonathan Quick. If you want to be an upset-minded team, you need physical two-way players to neutralize the studs on the other team. That's Kopitar and Deneau, right? And here's another idea. Kings coach Todd McClellan is a former Edmonton coach. He might have an idea or 2 on how to frustrate Connor McDavid and the rest of them. And obviously, since Edmonton's only been out of the first round once in a long time, they've been shocked before in the playoffs, repeatedly. So there's no chance in my mind that LA sweeps. I don't even know how good the odds are that they win. I think Edmonton's the favorite. But if the Kings put a seed of doubt in Edmonton's mind, watch out. What do you think? Now, if you enjoyed this episode, by all means, like and subscribe to Faithful Angelenos. We're trying to build something here. Thank you very much for watching. I'm James. We'll be back tomorrow. Faithful Angelenos is a Kia and Corta El Queso production. Have a good morning.